All righty. Thanks again, everyone, for joining our webinar where we talk about defending digital trust as we go over our social engineering defense predictions for this year. But before we dive in, I just wanted to give a few housekeeping notes. First, this session is being recorded. We'll send the recording and the slides to everyone who registered, so you don't have to feel the need to try to capture everything on the screen because we will send these out after the webinar. And then also you'll notice at the bottom there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window. So if you have any questions, please drop them there. We'll be monitoring those questions live. And then at the end of the discussion, Drew and I will go over the questions and we will try to answer them to the best of our ability. So again, thanks everyone for being here. Defending Digital Trust, Social Engineering Defense Predictions for 2026, brought to you by Doppel. Now let's do some introductions. I am Bobby Ford. I'm the Chief Strategy and Experience Officer here at Doppel, and I am fortunate to be joined by someone who has been a colleague and has been and is, and hopefully will continue to be a friend of mine, Drew Simonis. Drew, do you want to introduce yourself?
I've enjoyed our time as friends and hope it continues as well. I am a lifelong information security person, which explains a lot about my personality. I've been in the field for 25 plus years. I've watched the field grow up and evolve and continue to really enjoy the journey that we're on as professionals. And I think it's just going to get more and more challenging. And from an intellectual perspective, that's really rewarding. From a professional perspective, really difficult. And so, I'm thankful, one, to be able to talk to you about some of those challenges today, but for organizations like Doppel for putting the investment in helping the community understand and adapt to these kind of emerging challenges. So thank you for hosting this.
Yeah, absolutely, Drew. Thank you for being here. So, like I said, Drew, I know that you had a chance to look at it, but we're going to be talking about our social engineering defense predictions for 2026. So, I would encourage everyone that's in the webinar to actually go to doppel.com and to pull down the report because we're actually just going to not skim through, we're going to go through the report page by page and have a conversation about it. So if you have not already downloaded the report, like I said, go to doppel.com and then under the resources, you will find our predictions report. You can download it and you can follow along with us in real time. So first off, I think I love like the marketing approach to it. I love like the color schematic of the report. I like all things that have accents, so I love the accents.
Yeah.
And of course, I love gradient. And you can see the background is gradient. Drew's background is gradient. So huge fan of that. So aesthetically, it is very pleasing. And I think
Yeah.
that matters to me.
Well, it portrays a sense of professionalism for sure.
Absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do. So, first up in the report is the foreword by our co-founder and CEO, Kevin Tian. And there were a couple things that stood out to me in his opening foreword. And the first thing, Drew, he talks about is how most of cyber in the industry, we've spent the past 20 or so years focusing on securing the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and what it means?
Yeah, well, if you think about where we came from, it was servers and data, and even those evolutions from one to the other, they were a struggle for us. We're really good at locking down a data center. We're really good at controlling access to small, limited enclaves. We get really challenged, though, when it comes to, you know, things that are a little more fluid in their nature. The cloud is difficult compared to data centers and so on and so forth. But you know, we always tend to revert back to our form and try to constrain problems to really fit a mold that we're used to dealing with. And and I think just the reality of what we're seeing in this report and what we see in the real world is that the problem is so fluid that it's escaped our mold and there's no way to get it back in. That's my big concern.
I remember when I first became a CISO, I was told do everything you can to protect the data center. Make sure that you have the right processes in place to protect your infrastructure within the data center. And what we're discovering is that that's no longer the case. That, thanks to remote work, thanks to SaaS-based applications, no longer do we filter all traffic through the data center. And so securing the data center isn't the be all to end all that it was. And
Yeah,
along,
and it can't be because the reality is that there's a real easy door. In fact, there's thousands of doors into that data, and each of those is an employee, and that's it's not necessarily the infrastructure. It's how can I get to the data? How can I get access to that information? And people are usually the answer to that question.
something else that stood out to me with Kevin's opening forward in the report was that generative AI has now been commoditized.
Mhm.
It has been commoditized. And for me, what that means, and definitely want to hear what you have to say, but for me, what that means is that we are in real time witness this evolution of all attackers being sophisticated. You remember there was a time when we would talk about incidents and we would label them based on the sophistication of the adversary. Like,
Yeah,
how sophisticated of an attack was this? How sophisticated was the adversary? Well,
yeah,
I think that because of the commoditization of generative AI, that all attackers will be sophisticated. Like, what
yeah.
are your thoughts on that?
Well, think about risk management even just 2 or 3 years ago when you're trying to analyze the risk of a vulnerability, for example, you would make some determination to say this will take a sophisticated attacker. This will be exploitable by somebody using, sort of the little toolkits that are out there.
Yeah,
And you made prioritization decisions based on that calculation. I don't need to address this vulnerability because it really requires the high end adversary, and I don't think they're after me or whatever.
right.
All of our calculations have to be reimagined
Yeah.
because look at just today, like Sonnet comes out and it is the equivalent of what Opus was not too long ago in the Anthropic world, and but it's cheaper, it's easier, and all of the capabilities are being not commoditized necessarily as they are smoothed out. Like what was hard is now easy, and what was easy is even easier. It's scriptable. What was impossible is now doable because of the power of the not just the language models, but also the tooling that is being built on these language models, whether those are agents with skills that can work 24 hours a day and be aggressively testing every dimension of our defenses.
Yeah.
We're under persistent attack by sophisticated adversaries who are really just machines working forever against us.
And then that leads perfectly to something else that stood out to me in Kevin's forward, where he talked about this move towards multi-channel. There used to be a period where the second piece of information I was given after protect the data center was, lock down email.
Mhm.
And so as long as you had email covered, if you had those two things covered, it was about locking down the data center, it was about protecting email, and then it was about patching. And so
Yeah.
as long as you had those three sort of had mature programs that could address those three, then you are all good.
Hmm.
I think that we are seeing attacks move way beyond email, and it's not enough to just protect email. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, email was the preferred focus for adversaries because that's how people conducted business every day. It wasn't that email was magical or special. It was just that's where people were. That's how you would reach them. And I think a lot of people need to really refresh that perspective because it's Slack, it's Teams, it's Zoom calls, it's WhatsApp, it's, so many different ways, text messages.
Yeah,
The world communicates digitally in so many channels in so many contexts, and all of
yeah.
them are fluid. And so if we're just protecting email, then we really are taking this 1990s, early 2000s kind of perspective on what our adversary is doing. That they've evolved pretty dramatically. And the thing that makes it really hard for us is it's real easy for them to evolve. They just have to pivot. Uh,
You
like
just have
there's
to pivot.
incentives. Yeah, the incentives are there for them to do that. The rewards are ample and the costs are very low.
Yeah.
But for us in the enterprise, it's tremendously difficult. We have to change our culture. We have to change perceptions about why we're impacting operations in different contexts. So it's like we move at the speed of business while the attackers are moving at the speed of light.
Oh, I like that a lot. We do move at the speed of business, which unfortunately isn't always that fast.
No, it's
Uh,
cyclical, right?
and it's never as fast as the speed of light. I want to stay on this slide, but going to the next page in the report on page 3, we see that the key predictions are really broken down into these 4 areas.
Mhm.
The reality gap, where we talk about synthetic media and how it will render traditional verification methods obsolete. That's one of the areas. The second area is around the multi-channel siege, which we have here and will stay here. The third area is around the velocity war. And then the fourth area is around the code word society, which we'll get into. So if we stay on this multi-channel siege, we talked about email. What do you see, Drew, as like the next channel that's the most targeted? We recognize email is the most targeted, but what do you see as like the channel after email?
I think it's anything where I can abuse that reality gap to make my attack more effective. And so, that's going to be very cultural for an organization. But, if your developers or if your organization is, you know, kind of big WhatsApp place, then it's going to be WhatsApp because they're going to be
Yeah,
targeting you.
yeah,
If you're a Teams place, it's going to be across Teams. But it's I think it's going to be, and maybe already is, it's going to be where I can use video to improve the trustworthiness of my attack. And here's the other sort of sad reality of cyber is we see what we look for.
yeah,
And to your point about the data center, email filtering, patching, et cetera, like if you ask a cyber person, are those really big problems? They're going to say yes, because that's what they're fixated on.
yeah,
They're looking every day at a vulnerability scan. They're watching their email filters and phishing events, etc. Nobody's looking at what their employees are doing on third-party conversations on Slack or Zoom calls or WhatsApp. So we don't perceive these problems to be as significant as they may already be because we just don't have the ability to sense them.
yeah. I
So
agree. And not only do I agree, I think that when we look at the attacks and when we look at the multi-channel aspect and approach of these attacks, it's not one channel at a time. So it's not, hey, let me see if I can, get someone to fall victim via email. Our email didn't work. Let me see if I can get someone to fall victim via SMS. Okay, SMS didn't work. Let me see if I can call them. It's multi-channel simultaneously.
yeah,
There was a deepfake incident impacting this global engineering firm where they ended up losing like close to 25 million US dollars that started with an email. That email then provided a link for a video call. The person then hopped on the video call and saw what they believed were their colleagues in the video call. And as a result of that, ended up making, I think it was something like 15 to 20 different separate transactions for wire transfer that total to 25 million.
wow,
But
wow,
again, it started via email. That email then turned into a video call for verification.
yeah,
And so we're seeing like this multi-channel approach. And if you
yeah,
don't have a solution that provides for multi-channel coverage, then you're
yeah.
operating at a disadvantage,
I heard it like I just have to trip that person.
or you just have to trip that person.
I'm not as fast as you are, Bobby, so I've got to level the playing field in my favor.
So when we see this, how are you seeing organizations approach that defense?
Yeah, poorly, because
Okay.
I don't think they appreciate the reality of it. I think that what's really a what's really being attacked is their business process
Yeah.
and the absence of trolls that are designed to withstand these kind of sophisticated, very thoughtful, and very targeted attacks. I'll give you another example of an incident that I was aware of, which I thought was super sophisticated, multi-channel. It started on LinkedIn. It started with an impersonation of an executive on LinkedIn. So they went and they found an executive at a company who didn't have a LinkedIn profile and created one and began connecting with people in that company from that executive's fraudulent profile. Then they began communicating with their new connections via LinkedIn. And they were targeting this executive who they were impersonating and found out when that executive was on the road. They were attending a conference or doing something like this. And so they had built a relationship with an HR person in the company through LinkedIn. And they messaged him via LinkedIn saying, "Look, I'm on the road. I'm traveling. I'm going to be back. I'm leaving from the airport right now. I've got an interviewee coming. Can you escort them in and just leave my office? I'll be there in 10 minutes." And the HR person dutifully obeyed the executive. And the person they were walking in, of course, was the attacker. And they literally walked the attacker into this executive's office, said, "Sit down and make yourself at home." That is what is happening in the world today. And no cyber team in the world would have any idea that that was occurring and have absolutely no ability to do anything about it.
Yeah.
But it could have been interdicted early in that impersonation, the initial communications, et cetera, before it turned into a real physical compromise.
Yeah. And I think that it's not just enough to detect, you have to be able to disrupt the attacks.
You have to disrupt them.
You
Yes.
have to disrupt. All right, so if we go back to the reality gap, again, the report is broken down into these key predictions: reality gap, multi-channel siege, velocity war, Cold War society. Let's talk a little bit about the reality gap, because the reality gap for us and the prediction for us is that by the end of this year, you won't be able to distinguish what's real from what's fake.
I would say it like this: the very best of us won't be able to determine real from fake by the end of 2026.
Yeah.
Most of us cannot determine real from fake since 2024. We are already at an era where it doesn't have to be for it to be an effective thing. Just think about KYC checks for financial institutions or things like sanction validation. Many of these things rely on photographic evidence. Send me a picture of your ID or whatever. That's easy. And that has been easy. Now we can move up. And so they say, okay, well, instead of a picture, we're going to use a video call. Also now easy. And for the person who's maybe trying to do 100 of these a day, I just don't think, like I said, I mean, if you gave an expert one call and said determine if it's real or fake, maybe they could do that. If you gave somebody working on the line 100 calls and said, tell me which of those were fake, I just don't think they can do it.
And on page 8 of the report, we actually give tips for spotting a deep fake.
Mhm.
And in the tips, we say study the face and eyes, check lip sync and audio, look at lighting and shadows and background, watch body movement and expressions, and then we say verify outside video. I believe that by the end of this year, none of these tips will be relevant.
Yes, very possible. I think it comes down to we're going to return to basic humanity stuff.
Yeah,
Like I have a specific cadence of talking, you do too. Certain things that you pause to reflect on or whatever. You can mimic the sound and tone of my voice, but maybe not the style of my presentation. That won't matter if you don't know me.
yeah,
It
exactly.
won't matter if we haven't had a conversation in person, but it might be all we have left. It's like everything looks right, but it just doesn't seem right. Or we're gonna have to
Yeah.
learn to trust our gut more.
All right, we're halfway through, so I thought I would break it up a little bit, and I want to give you some multiple choice questions when we
Right.
talk
Okay.
about deep fakes and we talk about the impact of it and that generative AI has had on it. All right, so what percentage increase of deep fake detections did we notice from 2023 to 2024? Was it 100% increase, 250% increase, or 500% increase?
Well, I'm gonna go for the middle and say 250.
So between 2023 and 2024, some reports suggest that as much as 250%, there was a 250% increase in deepfake detections. All right, so let's go to the next one. What percentage of increase of deepfake driven identity fraud was noticed in 2023? So what percentage increase in deepfake driven identity fraud in 2023? Was it 500%? Was it 300%? Or was it 3,000%?
Hmm. Well, I'm going to go to the 500 because it seems if we're 250% detection, I'm just going to gamble at 500.
3,000% increase.
Jeepers creepers.
3,000% increase in deepfake driven identity fraud in 2023.
That's
All right, here is the last one. We're talking about
okay.
AI enabled impersonation scams. Scams help drive how much in crypto losses in 2025? Was it 4 million, 5 billion, or 17 billion?
I'm gonna guess 5 billion.
17 billion in crypto.
Spurs creepers again.
And when you think about that loss in that short period of time, for me, it's scary.
It is scary. I will caveat that my guess was calibrated to the price of crypto just a couple of weeks ago. I know it's rebounded, but yeah, I mean these things, these numbers start to feel abstract, and I think the real danger is that we see them as somebody else's problem, not our own,
Yeah,
because these are aggregate numbers. They're not individual numbers. And so even like ransomware, if I ransom an organization for 10 grand or even $1 million, people are like, well, that's not my money. But it adds up. And it isn't that it adds up in losses to the economy. It adds up to the people who are conducting these crimes. They're not nice people.
yeah.
They're using these monies. Like one of these, I think it was Lockbit or I don't remember, or Conti maybe. These ransomware gangs, their crypto wallet got captured by law enforcement, and it had something like $400 million in it. These are criminal gangs who are funding terrorism and human trafficking and drug smuggling and all these other criminal. Like they're not just limited to one criminal exercise. Stopping their ability to easily extort and steal from people in the cyber context is not just cyber hygiene. Like this is now a societal impact. We really have to start acting like that.
I agree with most of you say. I absolutely agree with that. And recognizing and tying the connections between the cyber impact to the physical world.
Yeah.
It's not just the convergence of the two because they've never truly been separate. It's understanding the impact of that cyber incident in the physical world.
Yeah. Well, and it's only separate because we decided organizationally to have different managers over a function in a corporation.
Yeah.
I mean, organizational silos are based sort of limiter to us having the kind of effective cross-domain visibility we are going to need to deal with multi-channel attacks.
All right, so we talked about the reality gap. We talked about the multi-channel siege. Next up is the velocity war. And here we talk about how just the old way of manual takedowns just can't compare
Yeah.
to the speed of how generative AI allows adversaries to stand up different environments, to stand up instances, to
Yeah.
stand up
Yeah.
infrastructure. The specific metric that we use here is that we've tracked 5 times speed increase in the resolution times using AI automation.
Mhm.
And with that, what we do then is bring down the mitigation time so that whereas before it would take organization days or weeks to bring it down, we're measuring takedowns via the hour.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that
Yeah.
speed. What would you say is the biggest impact to speed, velocity that we're seeing these attacks?
Well, there's the simplicity of the stand up. You don't have to think about earlier in our careers when maybe you had bot herders who were trying to conduct some kind of distributed attack. You'd have to go and either build your bot army or, buy it from somebody who had to build and manage it. And then you'd carefully use it because you didn't want to burn that asset, whatever, right? I mean,
Yep.
you had this slow evolving attack and everything worked at that pace. Nowadays, with cloud and with sort of all this orchestration technology, you can stand up a bot army or you can stand up pod farm in minutes,
Yeah.
almost instantly. And so the value of that asset to an attacker is none.
Yeah.
It's a means to an end. So they're going to burn it anyway. They're going to stand it up. They're going to beat the crap out of you, and they're going to burn it, and they're going to do that again and again and again. So if you're using traditional takedown timings,
Yeah.
you're taking a dead asset. It's like in those movies where the detectives show up at the crime scene and the bad guys and gals have already pulled out all of their systems and it's just this empty warehouse. That's what you're taking down if you're working at this traditional days, weeks, and months scale.
And that's why we like to say, it takes AI defenses to defend against AI attacks.
You have to.
Yeah, speed is paramount. So then the next one is code word society, which is really cool to me. And it ties nicely to the reality gap. And in this code word society, that we believe that you're going to have, for lack of a better, safe words
Yeah.
or or
We're
appreciate it.
naughty.
I was not trying to, I
Yeah.
promise.
No, but you're right. Like, okay, so people make fun of me a little bit for this, and it's a little bit silly, tongue in cheek, but I give my team code names, and and like if I'm using your code name, something bad has happened, and that was fun because you can make superhero themed code names. But that's the reality. Like it might be playful and in light-hearted spirit, but you've got to have a way where when the situation is really high stakes, that you can convey that to each other in a way that doesn't signal, because you have to assume in the worst case that adversaries are aware of your communications.
Yeah,
And so you want to be able to signal things to each other without being overt. That's a bit much for many people. And so if you think about the context of an executive with a financial transaction, hey, I know that I'm never supposed to call you. I'm the CFO. I'm never supposed to call a financial person and ask them to override and approve a PO. I'm never supposed to do that. But if I actually have to, I'm going to have something that will give you that second factor of validation. Today, that's a code word, makes a lot of sense. Practice into play in their
yeah,
organization, because beyond it being a good practice, I think it also starts a conversation
it
with
does.
your, why do we have to have a code word? Well, because we have business processes that aren't resilient to these kind of emerging attacks. We don't have the right kind of technical capabilities to interject and interdict them, whatever. But start with something people can wrap their heads around. I hope one day we get to a point where we have kind of a visual cue like an SSL padlock. Not that maybe that works really well, but I think we're going to need to get to that point where we have cryptographic proof of video provenance, and people can easily validate and consume trusted media universally, because otherwise, I don't know, we're just not built for a world where we can't trust our own eyes.
We are not built for that. That is the world that we have now entered into.
We've invented
And
it.
and as a result of that, organizations need technologies that sit in
Yeah.
between the users and either the data or the systems, whatever it is, the applications, but there has to be a technology because you can't education and awareness your way out of the problem. It's moving too fast and it's too good. If you go to page 5 of the report, on page 5, we talk about the end of seeing is believing.
Hmm.
And we talk about error one was around poorly written email.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, we trained our
Hmm.
users and we trained the organization on how to recognize a poorly written email. Look for these,
Yeah.
grammatical errors or look for these punctuation error. Look for difference in fonts.
Yeah.
So no longer is that applicable. So error one is absolutely done. Then era two was around spoof display names and static profile photos.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
if so if you see this random photo on this social media account or you see this random photo, in LinkedIn, I don't know do you consider LinkedIn social media? I do.
That way I can tell my children that I'm active on social media.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes,
I always think it's funny when someone posts something personal on LinkedIn and someone chimes in with, take that personal
take
stuff
that
to
to
social
Facebook.
media.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
this is social media, bro.
Yeah. We're getting funny videos these days on LinkedIn too.
Exactly, exactly. But Then era three was about audio only deepfakes, and we saw
Hmm.
these phone calls coming in, and it was like how to recognize the deepfake. And have you ever heard a deepfake? Have you ever talked to Drew's deepfake voice?
I deepfaked my chief executive at one of my jobs, but I've never talked to my own deepfake voice.
Oh, I think it's so trippy. So with our HRM solution, we can like spin up pretty quickly deepfake or synthetic voices or deepfake voices impersonating whoever. And it's really, really good. And it's sort of head trippy when you hear it because it's like we sound differently to
Yeah, we don't hear
ourselves.
our voices.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, that doesn't sound like me. Someone's like,
Yeah.
no, that's exactly what you sound like.
Yeah, the first time whenever every time I hear my own voice, I remind myself just don't talk so much. And it's also amazing how little video or audio it takes to create these deepfakes, like
Exactly.
seconds, just
Second.
seconds.
And then era four was is or is real-time interactive audio and video clone with absolute perfect lip sync.
Yeah,
And if we're in era four and most of our solutions are focused on era one,
era one, and they don't work very well for that.
and they don't work well after that, you need a solution. You need something, a technology, a platform that sits in between your users and the data or your users and the
Yeah,
system.
yeah. I think unfortunately, all we did in era one was teach people how to spot our phishing tests.
Yeah. And let me ask you this. Do you envision right now you have to have a phishing program, especially
Hmm.
if you're in a heavily regulated industry.
Yeah.
Do you expect regulations to change to focus more on multi-channel phishing?
Well, I think I don't know if regulations can catch up because they don't seem to be very able to do that in many contexts when it comes to regulating technology and its impacts. But I would just drop the and I'd have an ishing. I mean, we if we don't have vishing and smishing and phishing and we don't recognize that these things are all intertwined and
Yeah.
vishing me, this is another atomic event, somebody's smishing me, and get to the point where these are all parts of a continuum of a single campaign being waged against my employees and sometimes my customers and sometimes my business partners.
Yeah.
We just have to think differently. And to that earlier, little discussion we had about the physical security versus cyber, we have to get out of our own organizational silos that make it difficult for us to even conceive of, let alone cope with, these kind of sophisticated multi-domain, multi-channel targetings.
Well, Drew, our time is just about up. I've been checking Q&A. I don't see any questions posted there. I'll give it just a few seconds more to see. Oh, here we go. Here's a question, and I'll ask it to you, Drew. How do you balance friction and security when verification becomes part of everyday workflow?
It's a very difficult question to conceive of because, think about the adoption curve of multi-factor authentication. It wasn't smooth, and people didn't want to do it until they started to realize the absolute necessity of it and how effective it was to prevent transactions that impacted them in a way they didn't like. So I think if that's a lesson, then the friction sort of becomes tolerable when the pain of avoiding the control is too much. That's not a great way to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer, but I would say that's an open challenge for industry is to find a solution and don't stop when you have sort of the version one or the minimum viable, but focus on the experience of the consumer of that solution, the user
Yeah.
interface, the simplicity, the effectiveness, all have to be balanced. And sometimes we as a profession focus more on just the effectiveness and not necessarily the what does it feel like to live in that world. So I don't know what it'll look like, but I know it's important that we get it right because we can't have the same, we have to have something that can prevent these things because this is geopolitical stuff. This is election tampering. This is affecting the governance of the free world. I know that sounds super sensational to say it, but that's the truth of these multi-factor, multi-channel, deception-oriented things. Like, think of even something as simple as sentiment manipulation
Yeah.
If you're a consumer product company and somebody deepfakes a video from one of your executives that has them saying inappropriate things,
Yeah.
whatever those might be, yeah, that can spur very quick reaction, boycotts, etc. It can also spur instantaneous market movement and loss of value for your shareholders, loss of flexibility for your company to navigate financially, etc. These are real impacts. This is real consequential stuff. This is what we've been asking for when we want a seat at the table, and it's time that we face these challenges, but we have to do in a way that's going to speed adoption of the solutions.
Definitely want to speed the adoption of solutions and definitely want to make sure, like you said, that we're thinking of the overall experience of the users. One of the ways that I've addressed it in the past is making sure that I don't create this blanket approach to verifications.
Mhm.
You don't have to MFA into all applications, and you
Right.
don't have to MFA, every 30 minutes. Just making sure that you take a reasonable approach and that you've identified what's most critical to the organization, and then you put the right controls in place there.
I mean, banks are good at this. I don't need to do multi-factor for, well, I do, but like some transactions, I have to do a second authentication because
Exactly.
they're risky. And so, yeah, let's use the lessons that we've learned in other segments and verticals and apply them more broadly.
Yeah. Next question. If attackers are orchestrating domains, social profiles, paid ads, and SMS in tandem, who inside your organization actually owns the full attack surface?
No, we talked about silos. Brand protection owns part of that. Physical security owns part of that. Cybersecurity might have a stake in the game. Part of the responsibility of having the seat at the table is that you collaborate with peer leaders to identify and solve problems in a way that brings the most of the capabilities that an organization has to bear. It doesn't mean that people like I think a lot of cyber leaders think it means we just get greater prominence, but really what it means is we're part of a chorus now.
Right.
And and that's where we are today. But the other problem of that is if there's no lead singer, then who's going to carry the press? This is a tortured analogy, but you know what I mean? Like it can't be everyone's problem or it's no one's problem. So someone has to own this.
There are two answers. The first answer that I would give is you want to make sure that you're definitely working across multiple functions,
Yeah.
and you definitely want to make sure that you're getting buy-in from multiple functions. But, and you've heard me say this before, Drew, ultimately, whose responsibility is it? Who gets fired?
Hmm.
Like who gets fired as a result of it happening, and that's who should take it personal, and
Yeah,
that's who
yeah.
should view it as, their responsibility.
Well, and what a great opportunity for the CISO to step up and demonstrate their ability to be a cross-functional leader and to build consensus around an emerging problem that's going to be, I think, very consequential for their employer. I think this is a real time to shine if we were to sort of take the opportunity to do so.
Final question we have is from Jeff Cooper, and I'll read it to you. As
Yeah.
agents start acting like digital coworkers, they become targets, not just endpoints. If an
Yes.
agent can read tickets, approve actions, move data, or talk to other systems, then compromising that agent is like compromising an employee account. The attacker doesn't need malware if they can hijack or impersonate the agent and write its permissions, prompt, integrations, and tokens. So the question Jeff asked is, are we defending only humans from impersonations or also defending our digital coworkers from takeover and spoofing with the same kind of identity and trust controls we apply to people?
That is a I'll leave Bobby space for you to answer it, but I would say that that is such an important problem to solve because the it just opens up 100 different new doors. You know, we've been talking about multi-channel attacks in the context of multi-channel attacks approaching humans, Slack, Teams, and WhatsApp. There's a whole nother set of channels that are rapidly evolving, MCP, web MCP, and what other things A to A might be around the corner. And those are going to be even more difficult to monitor because they're going to be working everything at machine speed in natural language, where the detection of a malicious prompt or some malicious skill file or whatever is something we haven't solved yet at all, and we're gonna have to solve in this context too. I think it's yet another open problem as far as I've seen it, and a scary one. I don't know, Bobby, what do you think? What's Doppel doing?
Yeah, absolutely believe that Jeff hits on something that's critical and key in understanding like our approach, and by our I mean Doppel. And here's what I mean by that is if you take the premise that you can't educate and awareness your way out of the problem, what we're saying is that then it's not, the onus isn't on the user. So it's not about training the user, whether
Building a
that
system.
is an actual user or if that's an AI agent. Like
Mm,
that part is irrelevant because we believe that it doesn't matter. You're not training them. What we're doing is we're disrupting the attacks before it lands, disrupting the attack before it lands with the AI agent. So there are two pieces to the puzzle. There is the detection of it, and then there's the disruption of it. The goal, the aim is to disrupt the infrastructure before it's ever built, so before it can even launch the attack. And so, absolutely agree with Jeff is saying it, and it just further for me confirms that the right approach is to not rely on training or educating users, but to rely on technology that seeks to disrupt the attacks before they even.
yeah. Well, and that makes detection less important, I guess is the point. That not easier because you're not working at that middle stage.
Yes.
You're working before whatever malicious intent can be launched, and preventing the like nip it in the bud kind of context.
To me, it's breaking. So we've always thought of prevent, detect, respond. Prevent, detect, respond. To
Mhm.
me, what we're doing is we're really dissecting the prevent and putting something before the prevent, and that to me,
Disrupt.
so it's disrupt. So what like ultimately we want to disrupt, prevent, detect, respond. Like
I love
it's
it.
starting with the disruption.
I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, Drew, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience as well. Drew, did you want to say anything to the audience before we let them go?
No, just thanks for their time. Appreciate that. I'm grateful people took a moment of their day to listen to us, and I hope it was beneficial.
I'm absolutely certain it was beneficial. And again, want to encourage everyone to go to our website and to download our 2026 Social Engineering Predictions report, give it a read. And if you registered for this, you will receive a follow-up to this webinar with the slides that we went over. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our
Thank you.
brilliant marketing team for putting this together.